In this video, I'm going to lay it all out. I'm going to talk about how I could afford quitting, and I mostly did that through saving and then through investing as well. So keep on watching if you're interested. Then after 20 years, you would end up with 567 grand, and your total interest earned would have been 490 grand. So that is the amazing thing about compound interest. I'm going to be talking about saving first, so if you're interested in the investment part, then I will put some bookmarks in the video so that you can just jump straight to that section.
Quick 3-second disclaimer, and now we're back to the video.
So the first thing I did in order to quit was save, and obviously saving doesn't need much of an explanation, but I'm going to just dive a bit deeper into numbers. So I earned 25 grand a year, and after deducting taxes, that would get me to £1,700 a month that would land in my bank account. My monthly expenses were £700, and I couldn't really make that number much smaller, so I knew that fixed number is not money I could save. So technically then I have 1 grand at my disposal, and obviously your number will likely look very different to mine, but just realistically work out what are my expenses, where can I maybe potentially save a little bit, and then try to invest or save everything that's left over. It is good to just have some kind of realistic number established that you can invest every single month. But before you invest, it is quite important to have a little bit of money in the bank, and not to just invest everything and then not end up having anything in your bank account. I think the numbers that keep floating around of how much you should save is 3 to 6 months of living expenses, and that's money that should be in your account. But it really just depends on you. If you have a specific number in your head, for example 10 grand, that will just make you feel safe before you start investing, then obviously stick to that. I wanted to have a little bit more in my bank account before I started investing. The issue is when you leave that money in your bank account, it essentially depreciates, especially during the last couple of years. Things are looking a little bit better at the moment. The inflation rate in the UK is at 3% as of April 2024, and some banks have actually increased their interest rate. So for the money that you have saved and that you don't want to invest, I would definitely recommend looking out there and putting it in a bank account that gives you just a little bit of interest. If you don't want your money to depreciate, and if you want to keep up with the current inflation, then this is where investing comes in. Everyone probably already knows about all the different ways you can invest. So what I decided to do is to mainly just invest in ETFs and gold for the moment, just because they are relatively low risk. At the beginning, I must say I was really overwhelmed and I didn't know where to even start, so I just watched a bunch of YouTube videos, and I can maybe leave some recommendation. There's one channel that was amazing, and I will leave it down in the description box. So what is an ETF? So essentially what that means is that banks choose specific companies to invest in. Let's use the S&P 500 as an example. They essentially list the top 500 companies of America and invest in them. So the top few companies of that EFT will have a higher market value and will make up a bigger percentage of the market. So you are essentially investing more into them. And the nice thing about investing in the S&P 500 is that even if things change, and let's say the top company is no longer the top company anymore, then you're still investing in the top few companies, which makes your risk a lot lower than if you were to invest in a single or 2 or 3 companies. The top companies of the S&P 500 in 1980 were IMB, AT&T, and Exxon, which are companies that today are much lower on the list. Companies that are now really high on the list, like Microsoft, Apple, and Nvidia, used to be a lot lower on the list. Some important things to mention when you invest in ETFs like the MSCI World or the S&P 500. Don't freak out if the value of them decreases and there's a dip in the market, because that is always going to happen. So what they usually recommend with things like ETFs is to invest for a minimum of 5 years, and the longer you invest, the better. Your chance to get high returns kind of evening out, you are kind of balancing out the risk. It is really important to not focus too much on the numbers and to almost forget a little bit about your money and just leave it in there for a couple of years and really only invest money that you don't need at the moment. Obviously only invest if you can afford to lose that money. On average, the return for the S&P 500 is 10% yearly, especially if you invest for a very long time. We can have a little bit of a look at the graph, and what I can see is that it started in 1996. This is how it has progressed until now. You can see that there are some dips, but overall there is generally an upwards trend. So let's say if you had invested in 1996, it was worth 748 points and now it's worth 5,333 points. That's quite a big change. And obviously if you had, for example, started at the end of last year, it would have already increased by 1,000 points. And you might be asking, okay, so now I know that I should be investing in the S&P 500. Where do I do that? I personally use Vanguard, but you can do a little bit of research. To be honest, any bank kind of does their own S&P 500 and they are all pretty much identical. Vanguard is a really good one because it has low fees. So just definitely maybe first look at what your bank does, but definitely with that sort of thing, just do your own research and find what you're comfortable with. So then I thought what might be interesting is to do a little bit of a calculation to just see how much compound interest makes a difference. So there are calculators for compound interest online. You can just type it into Google. So for example, let's say we started out with 0 and then have an interest rate of 10%, which is roughly the interest rate of the S&P 500. And then we invest over, let's say 5 years, and monthly we deposit £1,000. Then we can calculate that. We would have invested 77 grand and gotten an interest of £17,000. That isn't really all that much, but what you then do, 77,000 interest rate 10%, and you do that maybe over 20 years. And let's say you're not going to pay anything into that. You're just going to let it rest, let it sit there. Then after 20 years, you would end up with 567 grand and your total interest earned would have been 490 grand. So that is the amazing thing about compound interest. The longer you leave it in, the better, essentially. Obviously, to leave money in a bank for 20 years is quite a long time. So I would recommend to maybe also have another plan alongside it to just have money that you can use. It's definitely a good idea to invest as soon as you can with as much as you can. But I honestly find it is such a peace of mind just knowing that I have money that is working for me and that I don't have to necessarily stay in a job that I absolutely hate, because I just have that little bit of financial freedom. One other thing that I thought I would mention is that I actually invest my money in the UK and also in Germany. And in Germany, I essentially have a banker that invests my money for me, and they essentially also just invest it in ETFs. And that is also another thing you could consider if your bank does something like that, because then you don't need to touch anything. They do all the work for you. I have my kind of ETF in Germany, then I invest in the S&P 500, and I'm looking to invest in the MSCI World at some point as well. And then I also invest in gold, which is actually the last point I want to make. So I actually have a gold coin right here, and this is a Royal Britannia coin. And to be honest, I could probably do a whole video just on gold. There's quite a lot to it, and this video is already getting quite long, so I won't bore you too much. But I find it quite nice to just have some gold that I can keep, and it's just something that I know holds value, and it's something that I can actually see, and I think it just makes investing a little bit more fun. So gold has been used for centuries and it's not decreased in value since then. So even the ancient Romans used it, even in ancient Egypt they already used gold. I have seen some calculations as well that in ancient Roman times you could essentially buy with the same amount of gold something that you can buy now with it, which is obviously very different to money which has just depreciated over the years. So for example, we've got the value of £100 in 1970 and how much it would be worth now. So you can see how crazy inflation is, and you can even see it through the years here. And then I've also had a little bit of a look how far back you can go, and the furthest back you can go is the year 1270. And I've done £100 as well, and in 2017 this is worth approximately 72 grand. In 1270 you could buy all of this with it. It's roughly the 3-year wage of a skilled tradesman. You can just see how much the pound and money in general does increase. And then I quite like to always look on the Royal Mint website. This is actually the best place in the UK to buy your gold because it is directly from the Royal Mint. This graph starts in 1968 and you can see the massive increase sort of in value. It started with £14 and now it's worth around £1,800. Again, it's an amazing investment if you just keep it for 20-30 years or as long as you can. And then again, you can actually invest in silver and platinum as well. And silver is a little bit more volatile, as you can see. It doesn't just go up, it also kind of goes down. That is also something you could consider, and then obviously do your research as well. Investing in gold is essentially a way to beat inflation, and actually for me personally so much it has actually returned me more than inflation. So here you can see the yearly change. This is the current price of gold, and this is how much it's gone up over the last year. So that is roughly an increase of 15% over the last year. So I would say for the moment, gold definitely beats inflation. Again, that might change. Obviously, as already said a couple of times in this video, do take everything with a little bit of a pinch of salt. Do your own research, and yeah, things might change. There's always going to be a little bit of a risk with investing, but these are all the things I do, and so far they've actually worked amazingly well, and the only thing I regret is that I didn't start investing sooner. I hope you enjoyed this video. I can definitely do more on this. I could share a little bit more how I got started in gold. The only thing is, before I started investing, I did a bunch of research. I watched a bunch of YouTube videos, and that is sort of how I got started, and that is basically where I get all my knowledge from. So yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you very soon with another video. Goodbye.